All right. Okay, great. Levels look good. Thank you and welcome. It is now 12:06 p.m. Eastern Time, and you have dialed into the Helium monthly community call, a place for friends, also for hips. We are fighting a little bit of audio recording drama because Discord Stages is not recording friendly, but I have a recording going now, Lewis. So uh, hopefully you're off the hook. And then I'll put voice chat text in the Helium Discord is the place to be if you've got questions, comments, or other things to say. And otherwise, I am, since we're starting a little bit late, going to dive right into our amazing agenda. And it's pretty action-packed this month, so I'll be time copying a little more strictly than usual. We're going to start out with the update from the Manufacturing Oversight Committee, Foundation Grants update, as always. And then we have two new HIPs to discuss. HIP 57 related to a POC rewards establishment period. That was either Scott, Starwatcher, or Joey. So I'll nominate one of y'all to talk through that, as well as hash code from Nova Labs with a reviving POC V11's distance limit, and Leo from Australia dialing in in the middle of the night to talk about some committee process. And then we had a couple of kind of question comment items. One from Keith R about the programmatic treasury price equations used in the various sub-DAO proposals. Console product team discussing a little bit of the changes that have happened with Helium Console. And the last one, time permitting, from Gaz McGee, could the router manage individual gateway frequencies dynamically? So I'm actually without a note taker as well. I'm a hot mess this month. It's true. In case, let me see who we've got. 2 a.m. in Australia. That's pretty middle of the night as far as I'm concerned. So let's take it away. Do we have anybody from the MOC?
Yes, we do.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this
Well,
is Nick Hawks with the MOC. I am the least technical member, so I'll be reading notes that I mostly understand, but this should keep you guys updated. The MOC is holding a hearing with the POC, Security Working Group, and Deeper tomorrow, April 7th. MOC will review all evidence after the hearing, and an update, the MOC may require more time to review, will be provided Friday, April 15th. So that's kind of the big news. The second piece is that two new full hotspots from new manufacturers have been approved. PICOM, which is approved for Europe, United States, and I guess Canada. America's hat. You're doing great, guys. And Atom, which is approved for South Africa. And then finally, MOC voted that swapping, this kind of radio card geek stuff, but swapping the SX1302 with a SX1303 or swapping an SX1303 with a SX1302 will not require a new audit. However, those are, I guess, close enough that no new audit is needed, but swapping a SX1303 or 1302 with a SX1301 or SX1308 does require a new audit. And the kind of non-technical way to think of that is that you can swap out new stuff for new stuff, but you can't swap out old stuff for new stuff or new stuff for old stuff. That should conclude the MOC update.
thank you, Gristle King. I am drowning in acronyms, but I appreciate the human translation.
Yeah, well, MOC is Manufacturers Oversight Committee.
Yes, yeah. Part numbers too. Great. And then up next, Joey, do you know, or Scott, do we have somebody from the foundation with the grants update, the usual grants update?
Yeah, I just got some Clarissa is out today, so I do have some notes. So it'll be a more abridged update, but nevertheless an exciting one. So I can run through some of the things that are happening in Grantland. For starters, I think that really great notable one is Helium as a network is building bridges into DeFi. Really excited about this. We've already got two underway through the grants program. We've got Noble Networks that was approved, building primarily into Ethereum and EVM chains, and Mycelium team, who is building into the Solana ecosystem. Those of you who are a little bit less familiar with DeFi, this is just really fantastic as far as adding even more utility to HNT, access to a wide host of permissionless financial and crypto markets tools. And this is being built under the current architecture. I know there are other HIPs that we're discussing other potential futures for what the Helium network is going to look like, but these will have value and shelf life regardless of. So really great. These projects are underway. They're building, and we'll have more updates on those in the coming weeks. Another one is one of the two HIP 22 implementations has crossed a pretty significant milestone with this is Paul, who has designed and fabricated 5 PCB boards. Secure concentrator. Again, I'm sure most people here are already plenty familiar with HIP 22, but as far as secure concentrators being another great way for the network to overall just kind of combat gaming, so another great one for everybody to be excited about. As far as a large industrial solution, pretty cool one that is an open source sensor to detect corrosion in oil and gas pipelines. So I don't think I need to kind of talk about the market size opportunity here, but great to see kind of these kind of large industrial solutions being kind of built on top of the Helium network and actual hardware being prototyped and funded through the grant program is pretty excellent. And that is Deacon Kevin. A couple other ones is we had Ivan, which was issue 26 in the grants program. So he was building out some more kind of educational resources for large organizations to onboard into the network. Joe from Helium Balloon, who was doing a Helium API Python library. So I think he added some functionality and completed a milestone there. Those are kind of the high level ones, but overall, pretty excited, especially on kind of the bridge side of things, some of these larger industrial solutions, and connected with a few more of our new advisors this morning. So we're bringing more resources to bear as far as how we can better assess things for IoT solutions, more cross-chain compatibility from a crypto perspective, and thinking a lot more in general about how we can improve like the overall UX of the program and keep leveling it up to open up to new channels, new partners, getting in front of developer communities, both crypto side and kind of on the IoT side of the world. So a lot of exciting activity overall. I think we may have reported last month, but when we had funded, I think around $500,000 in grants for 2021, we have already cleared that and then some for the first quarter this year. So a lot of momentum, a lot of great building happening, and great to see that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Scott. And then if anybody listening is interested in applying for a grant, where should they go?
They should go. We should actually, Joe Yuan, can you post in the GitHub link into the grant program? If not, I will do that as soon as I'm done talking.
Yeah.
That will be in the.
And just as a continual note, the Helium.Foundation website has a ton of great links for this stuff. It's not foundation.helium, it's helium.foundation.
Yes, and you can expect a new pretty home for the grants program coming to that website sometime soon in
Yes.
development.
Yeah.
Transition's always a work in progress. I'm sure everybody completely understands and is perfectly sympathetic. That's great. Thank you so much, Scott. Yeah, and then we just posted some links in voice chat text. The place to be if you have questions or comments on things so far, and we'll post links throughout the talks today to the relevant HIPs and things being discussed as we go through them. Great. Up next, Scott, I don't know who you have.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to kind of keep talking.
We'll roll you right forward. Fantastic.
But we've got Joey and Star Watcher here as well, who can come at this from more of a technical perspective, but can give a little bit of a contextual overview on like the catalyst of what we're thinking about and what prompted us to put together HIP 57. So overall, the one great thing about this is really part of a larger effort to build a comprehensive arsenal against gaming on the network, and we're coming at this from a number of different angles here. So for starters, we have a denial list. How do we make sure we're keeping dishonest hosts from continuing to game on the network and removing them from POC? You've got the manufacturing oversight with the ability to remove a maker's key to the degree that we can find compelling evidence or high confidence evidence that a maker is party to some sort of gaming scheme. And good to see that there is some momentum on. I know there was the announcement about Deeper. And there's more research and analysis being done on where we are or where the community is finding some other connections into what might be kind of dishonest behavior. I just mentioned HIP-22, creating more of a physical root of trust. I'm not going to steal Hashcode's thunder around HIP-58. So with this, really the effort is how do we make sure we're staying ahead of anybody who's trying to cheat? The idea that the time for analysis being outpaced by the rate at which people can game and that is economically viable to earn those rewards in a short period. As long as that arbitration window exists, arbitrage window exists, people are going to take advantage of that. So the idea here was, how can we ensure that hotspots that are jumping into the network dishonestly and are immediately earning very significant, high anomaly rewards are disincentivized to do so. And I think that we've got a couple of examples of that. Joe, I don't know if you want to jump in. I know you had a couple that you could point out potentially there as far as like very clear cases where hotspots who are on into the network and within a day or two earning substantially in an order of rewards. But really overall, the point of the HIP is we want to make sure that we're disincentivizing the game early on and creating the right type of ramp period where the analysis work can be done to make sure that hotspots are appropriately added to the deny list, or that we can kind of see patterns and create kind of better algorithms to better predictive work, so we can again driving towards the network being honest, high integrity. Joey, do you want to add on, or before Matthew talks a little bit about kind of some of the research and analysis work and how that kind of plays into the HIP?
Let's go ahead and talk research and analysis, and then I'll sort of talk a little bit about the timeframes and things associated with that.
Great, start.
Okay, thank you. So to start out, I want to paint a picture for you about the kind of challenges that we're facing right now when it comes to doing research on gaming on the network. It's not an easy problem, and for those who aren't sort of up to date on the deep technical side of things, I'd like to start actually by using an analogy. So let's say that you're interested in understanding the weather in a particular place on Earth. You might put a temperature sensor or a wind sensor or a rain gauge there, and you might make a measurement, say, once per day. And say that on 3 days per week, it's sunny, and on the 5th day, it's raining. What conclusion can you draw based on those data points? And what we're up against right now is the fact that because of the rate at which POC activity occurs, we can only make these measurements once per day. But we want to draw sensible and well-grounded in the data conclusions about behavior that may be abnormal on the network. So for the weather example, how do you figure out, based on limited data over a limited time period, what's normal and what's abnormal? And there are a couple of ways that you can do this. The first way is you can average over a sufficiently long period of time, right? You could leave your sensor out there for years and you could collect data points once per day. And you could take averages, and you could notice the variance in the data, how often certain anomalies happen, and you could put together a very good statistical picture of what's going on. The other thing you can do is you can just take measurements much more frequently. If you take measurements on a cadence of, say, every minute, then you've got a lot more data to work with, and it would be easier to detect anomalies, at least over the short term. The problem with the second method is twofold. The first is that POC activity occurs at more or less a fixed rate on the network. So the beacons that a given hotspot emits and are received by different witnesses of that hotspot, of course, record data to the blockchain, which we can analyze. But this happens at a rate which does not exceed usually a few per day. On the other hand, we can't extend the time window that we do these measurements over too long a period, because what that does is it provides gamers an opportunity to learn and adapt and change their setups to not look anomalous, or perhaps even introduce data which is not representative of their behavior on the network. There are some attacks that are known that work that way. So what HIP 57 is about is choosing exactly the right time interval that you can measure behavior on the network for as short a period as possible and draw statistically valid inferences about what's anomalous and what's not. So we've got pretty much a week set as that time. A week is good because it actually gives you typically a couple hundred data points. And if you think of your usual kind of experiment, a couple hundred data points gives you an error of roughly the square root, which would be, in this case, around 10, right? 10 times 10 is 100. So we can do this over that short period of time without accumulating significant statistical error and making significant mistakes. And the other thing that HIP 57 allows us to do is when a new actor comes on the network, it permits a certain amount of time to do these measurements and assess whether they're behaving legitimately or not without risk to the other network participants. In other words, it will no longer be economically possible or viable for somebody to buy a bunch of hotspots, say, and set them up and make their money back before our analysis techniques catch up. Now, right now, the current state of the art is that we can detect game data from a little less than half a week. So a week is actually more than we need to be certain. And one of the reasons that we picked this time period was it has to be, on one hand, as short as possible so as to not otherwise inconvenience legitimate actors on the network, but just long enough that we can accurately and precisely determine what's anomalous behavior and what's not. And we have a lot of data to support us when it comes to making these assessments. For an individual hotspot, a week is enough, more than enough actually, to do this assessment, but we also have permanently encoded on the blockchain data from all other actors, especially ones that have been put on the deny list for all time. So for our weather example, this is like putting one weather station up, making a measurement for 1 week, a few data points a day, and then comparing it to the entire climate and weather models of the US government, say. And that's the kind of problem that we're facing right now, is to unify, on one hand, short measurements for particular hotspots, and on the other, big statistical models for the entire network. And our goal with HIP 57 is to combine those two in a way that does not negatively affect honest actors on the network, but takes away any possible incentive for people to act dishonestly over the short term, shorter than a period of 1 week. It will force them out into the light, where any analysis tools, even ones that we may not know about now, ones that the community are coming up with, in real time, can be applied and used. So it's about opening a door to better analysis techniques and ultimately reducing the risk profile for any gaming on the network.
Yeah, I think the analogy works interestingly really well. So just to talk really briefly, I realize, Jamie, feel free to stop me if we need to time cop this a little bit, but the sort of technical impacts of this HIP is that, yes, there would be a period of time when a hotspot has first been asserted to a new location, wherein it would earn a fraction of its existing rewards. So we've got that number set at 10% of rewards that it would have earned in that first week. There's been some other proposals in the channel around, like, can we take those rewards and put them in a holding account that then sort of gets transferred back to the user? The feeling here is that is going to add sort of this sort of drastic level of complexity for effectively what is the same result. So the math that we're running on this is that if you defer this sort of initial period of earnings, just completely ignore it, because we are able to leverage that in eliminating gaming on the network as a sort of one of these tools, the idea is that those earnings are going to go back to the entire legitimate network. And then over a period of roughly a year, your hotspot will have seen those rewards anyway. So we sort of feel, as far as the approach here, that this is the simplest way to sort of achieve the outcome. But yeah, this is sort of always an ongoing conversation. Scott, is there a point that I'm missing here? I think we're probably good.
Yeah, I think yeah, Matthew covered a lot of the kind of the analysis side, and I think he gave some of the details for folks who haven't been able to read the HIP.
Oh yeah, so the one last thing is, we've seen this precise rosewood urchin and a couple of other hotspots floating around, and we actually, I went in and added one of them to the HIP last night. They sort of stand as a really strong example of why this establishment period is really helpful, because even in the world where we know exactly how this gaming is happening, there's still opportunity for bad actors to sort of leverage this arbitrage period when a hotspot has been initially asserted to earn this disproportionate amount of rewards before it can actually be added to a deny list and effectively circulated to all the deny list users. So that's sort of a secondary benefit of this establishment period. That's all.
Great. Thank you, Scott, Starwatcher, and Joey. One question from the audience was, why wouldn't someone just start gaming after the establishment period?
Yes. So the nice thing is that because we have sort of a baseline understanding of how a hotspot is performing on the network, if they were to try and do something immediately after, it's going to be this sort of markedly different state for the hotspot, which should be detectable pretty quickly.
There's another aspect to that too, if I may.
Please.
If someone tries to do that kind of attack on the network, it forces them to behave in a way which appears legitimate or requires things like antennas and legitimate deployments and talking to other hotspots that they don't own for the establishment period. And so it introduces a cost to them during that time, which they would then have to take down and begin gaming. So besides what Joey says, it also introduces another cost on them to do that attack.
Yeah. The thing we're working toward the thing that we are working toward here is the only way to really game something is actually just to go install the hotspots legitimately. Like
the ultimate game. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Any more questions from the audience? I'll give it another minute. I know, obviously gaming and cheating on the network is a hot button issue, so it's quite exciting to see a couple of new proposals like this to help tackle it. Not great. Then the link to HIP 57 is in both the agenda for the community call as well as in the chat. And if there's any other questions, you know how to reach Joey, Scott, and Starwatcher, the authors. Thank you, all three of you. And then, we have 2 requests to speak. We're a little short on time, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to go ahead with our other topics. But if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. Oh yes, and Joey, thank you. I remind everybody there is a dedicated channel for HIP 57 related to this establishment period in case you have specific questions on the topic. And then, so up next we have Leo from Australia. Thank you again for staying up to join us in our very North America-centric time zone choice. Let me invite you to speak. You'll need to accept the, you nailed it.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Very good morning here from Australia. As you said, it's slightly early. It's actually it's exactly 2 a.m. at the moment in Adelaide here. So I hope I can sound coherent at this time of the day. What I'm going to do is just basically quickly go over the history of what brought us to this proposal. I've actually just posting the links in the voice text chat at the moment, so you can have a look at the documents that are underlying all of this. Quickly to my name. My name is actually Leo Gagel. I'm the chairperson of the Growing Data Foundation. We do a bit of LoRaWAN and LPWAN work here in Australia, and a little bit of advocacy work around LoRaWAN. And we've sort of been presented in it was the 13th of February, I believe, with a PR that was going to change the frequency in Australia from the Australian AU915 FSP2 frequency that we've got at the moment to the Asian AS9231 frequency band. Now, that came completely out of the blue for the community here in Australia. And we were honestly quite surprised as to the motivations of that. And when we started researching into this, it appeared that there was a committee decision that was made on the 10th of December the prior year that basically decided to change this frequency band for Australia. What we also then found when we looked into the establishment of the committee, that there weren't actually any terms of references or any governance structures outlined for that particular committee. So the only references we could find to the committee were basically a press release where there was an announcement of a roaming agreement and basically that this committee has been established. And then there was a mention of that committee in both HIP 45 and HIP 46, which are sort of relevant to LoRaWAN. We then had a community call with Louis and the Australian community to sort of work out what the motivations behind this change were, and what brought us to this particular change. And as part of that, we found that there probably was quite a few areas where there was shortcomings in the way that the committee was operating. So it wasn't clear how the members were selected. There was no declarations of a commercial conflict of interest, and also the procedure of including the affected community wasn't actually there. So the decision-making process did not appear to include the affected community at all. So as part of that, and I think I put the HIP 45 reference into the chat, there was a discussion with Jamie and Louis to actually do some work around a HIP that will define the terms of reference for this committee. And also, obviously, one of the things that is worth mentioning is that this governance for this committee can probably not sort of stand in its own right, and it has to be integrated with the larger DY or the Helium Foundation, as it's called now, overall governance structure. And I have spoken with Scott over the last few days, and I know that there's ongoing work that the foundation will be sharing this month. And hopefully, what we've done here is then going to be integrated into a larger piece of work around the governance structure for the foundation itself. Also, quickly worth mentioning, there's a thank you for people that have actually assisted in the establishment of that HIP, and also in the technical discussion around the frequency change. It's particularly on this one, Tony Smith, Gary McGee, who I believe is on the call, James Michael, who's also on the call, and Shane from Voodoo Tech. I'm not sure if he's actually online at the moment. So just to quickly cover the major points. I mean, you could probably all read up on the actual pull request 378. It's largely defining the processes around the member selection, the declaration of conflict of interest, governance procedures, specifically reporting, how the committee can actually perform subgroups and specific tasks and assignments to actually include the stakeholders and assist other people in the committee decisions. Some basic ethics guidelines and also obviously a process of ensuring that the affected regions or the affected communities are actually included in the decision making process. So in terms of the decision making process, I mean, we have had over the last few days a number of discussions, and I think that the inclusion of the Australian community has actually now started to take place, and there is a town hall meeting that is planned next week where all of these issues are starting to be discussed. But I think it's really important to actually have these terms of references clear for the committee, so that these kinds of issues with decisions being made, being dropped onto the affected communities cannot happen in future, so that these community inclusion processes are actually written into the terms of reference of the committee, rather than having to be forced by the community at sort of a great amount of time. In terms of the detailed explanation, I think it's sort of been outlined. These are basically terms of reference of a sort of industry bodies, industry standards, and we've taken a lot of our work from similar bodies that would be relevant to a committee like this, dealing with obviously the guiding principles or terms of reference, that what's the actual responsibility for the committee, communications, what the recommendation must be consistent, and also obviously communicated in a timely fashion, which has also been sort of a bit of an issue with the process here, where there's a decision made and that the actual outcome of the decision wasn't known for over 3 months. So all of these processes, I think, are pretty stock standard for standards body industry bodies, and shouldn't come at a huge surprise. So I think in terms of obviously the next couple of things, membership, how the committee should really be chaired independently. So it's really chaired by a person that is independent of both. I had DY and Helium Inc. in there that obviously needs to be updated since last week's announcement to Nova and Helium Foundation. That it should have LoRa experts, and that's particular to the obviously the LoRaWAN committee. It's probably worth noting that there's also terms of references being developed for the MOC, the Manufacturing Oversight Committee, and I do believe that this work around the LoRaWAN committee needs to fit in with the overall committee structures and into the overall work that's been done around the terms of or the governance structure for the foundation itself.
Got it. Thank you, Leo. Sorry, just to interrupt. Just to clarify too, around your proposal, I know that you have this draft HIP that's related to the structure and process around the LoRaWAN committee specifically, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And then is that that's independent from this ongoing discussion around the actual frequency plan used in Australia?
That is correct. I mean, obviously, the LoRaWAN committee has other functions as well. I mentioned HIP 46. I'm not 100% sure what the plans are outside of that. So the reason that the frequency change obviously came into this is it was the actual cause of us looking at that, and why could a decision that hasn't included the community be going down so far, and so what we're trying to address with this is the problem that this frequency change has caused, and trying to not have these things happen in future.
Copy that. Great.
Jamie,
Yeah.
if I jump in for a second, how are we on time?
Please. Yeah, I was going to ask just sort of even a one-liner on the. I know the LoRaWAN, the background of the LoRaWAN committee as it stands today, and then any thoughts on this proposal, and any questions from the chat too. Please post in voice chat text if you have any.
Yeah, happy to address across a few different areas here. So number one, with respect to the kind of the regional frequency decision. So I made a statement about that late last night, U.S. time, as far as the foundation's desire to halt any decision from the status quo. I think that there was a lot of great points from the community of where kind of a number of aspects from HIP 45 felt short and need kind of further assessment. So Leo and others who have contributed, I really do appreciate the thoughtful feedback that's come out from the community. I think that it just generally shows the resolve of folks for the network to be successful in their local region. And as I stated last night, this is a great thing. So the next steps on the kind of the local regional frequency, the town hall that is scheduled for next week, that is still going to go on, but that's strictly going to be for informational, educational purposes only, to have a more thoughtful, informed discussion across different stakeholders, whether we're talking about hosts, commercial users, network operators, on what's the best way for Australia. I know New Zealand is also, again, I don't want to group those two together. I will get in a lot of trouble for that. But as far as having some discussion around what is going to be the best path forward for roaming, for use, considering existing commercial and public sector operations. So next week's call is not to drive towards an urgent decision so much as let's do a lot more fact finding and do that open, publicly, and recorded. I think that that's something that wasn't done sufficiently during what was supposed to be a public comment period under the HIP 45 framework. So we're going to work to correct that right now. So that's number one. Two is the idea of kind of reprocessing HIP 45 in general. As I kind of said, there was a straw poll for it. It did have low participation. We've had a lot of HIPs that have had straw polls that have, we denote those as passed. Something that we're actively been working on from a foundation side, and we're going to bring up publicly for more collaborative discussion, is much more of a solid framework around number one, addressing everything around what in terms of voting, what goes to on-chain votes, what things are we still doing by rough consensus, and creating more standards across the different areas of the network and how those things are voting and reducing ambiguity there. The other bit is more standardized community framework. So again, the Manufacturing Oversight Committee, which has kind of served a lot as the guinea pig and how we've been learning in public on this, there is a charter for that committee now as far as their roles, responsibilities, who can be added, what power they specifically have, how they're voting. That is continuing to evolve, but that is a publicly available document. Moving forward, what we're going to be building from a foundation side is a directory for all of these committee structures. So you'll be able to see exactly what Leo's working towards and where I want to fold this work in together, and what we've been doing over here, which is, what are the standards of if you are standing up a new committee, who are the initial appointees, how are folks added, what does voting look like, that all documentation, meeting notes is held in one publicly available directory, so there is transparency across all the different committees, LoRaWAN and otherwise. So work that we've been actively doing, obviously been incredibly busy lately. There's a lot of moving parts, but now that we are through this, kind of the larger transition news to DUI becoming Helium Foundation, taking on more responsibility, Helium becoming Nova, we want to turn our attention back to formalizing different areas of governance, committee structure, voting, whatnot, so we can start to clear a lot of these things up that have been left in ambiguity for what's been a little bit too long from my perspective. But it is a highly urgent area. As far as kind of the existing lower wing committee, as I kind of stated, I'm very, very, I if anything, support, amending what is kind of the existing kind of HIP 45 model. If that means that we are changing the overall charter, if we're changing the shape of the committee, I want this to be, certainly a collaborative effort in addressing the voiced concerns of the community. So hopefully I covered all the points there. Again, I did make a kind of a statement about this last night in that HIP 45 channel for folks who didn't see. Looking forward to next week's town hall so we can further discuss what's going to make that local region very successful from a roaming and commercial use perspective.
Leo, how does that sound to you?
That sounds great. Obviously, same here. Looking forward to the discussion around the town hall and get all of this out, and then hopefully find a way to actually start this process. If there is actually interest of the community to go forward with some changes, that they start with a newly formed Lorraine committee under these. And also the overall foundation terms of reference, and we can go through this new HIP 45 or improved HIP 45 process with the community and everybody engaged.
Yeah, totally agreed. And I have almost a communications preference. So with HIP 45, I know there's been some discussion about or some comments made about how this one didn't go to a vote, but it was a proposal that was open for more than a few months and discussed on multiple community calls, and sort of there were, even though it wasn't a push notification sent to every Helium hotspot app owner, or a formal on-chain vote with heliumvote.com, would there have been other ways of better communicating that at the time, in your opinion?
Look, I mean, it's not the sexiest topic, to be honest. So I think people sort of realized that it was there. The process itself, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just obviously it was missing a lot of the meat. That once it actually comes to decision, becomes quite important. I mean, to us, one of the real issues was that the committee decision happened in December, and it wasn't actually communicated until this HIP 45 was approved under that process. And I do not believe that HIP 45 would have had that little response would that decision have been known. So I think it's probably communication, not just about HIP 45 itself, but also what happened behind the scenes that wasn't known at the stage.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I do think that I agree that the structure as designed made sense, but to your point, sort of failed its first pressure test. And so I really appreciate your engagement on this topic and helping put together this new proposal. And I imagine that you've nominated yourself for this committee too, so my condolences.
Not. I think we have plenty of really good LoRaWAN experts. If anybody, I would probably nominate Tony Smith. I'm certainly not putting my hand up for the committee.
That's great.
But was one thing in terms of positive outcome. I mean, we have had really good engagement from the local community, and I do believe the local community would be more than happy to help. And I think it sort of really brought the community together here locally as well, and we got to know each other a lot better than we did before.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that too. Yeah, and this really did highlight the importance of really tapping into the regional communities for this too. Which, I mean, God help us with maybe one day COVID subsiding, we can really get these Helium user group meetups going again, which I've been wanting to attend for years. So
sounds great.
great.
One little procedural thing, if possible, if these the community calls could be put towards a time that is there's sort of feasible for all the continents. I believe the Helium happy hour that Travis is doing is probably a great time that works for within business hours for close to business hours for all of those. So if we could look at the timing of the community calls, that would be much appreciated from Australia.
Duly noted. There are a couple of crypto protocols that I follow that actually run two calls. They often run kind of like a, one that's more of an Asia Pacific friendly time zone versus sort of more of a North America Europe focused time zone. Would that be strange to split it into two calls, or
Look, I think that could work, but to me the happy hour, I think that is for us at the moment, since daylight saving has ended around 5:30 in the morning, and I'm quite happy to get up 5:30 in the morning. 1:30 a.m. is probably not the nicest time.
Got it. Great. Well, really appreciate the feedback, and thank you very much, Leo. Look forward to talking more about the LoRaWAN committee that you are absolutely now a member of. I'm almost positive that's how this works.
Let's talk about that.
Great. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jamie.
And thank you very much, Scott, for fielding questions on frequencies. Always a serious issue. Really impacts a lot of people whenever we make changes. Sorry, I'm just checking my handy dandy agenda. Oh, Hashcode, you have tagged yourself right in. Thank you for joining us. We have 15 minutes on the schedule to discuss your new HIP 58 POC distance limit, which I will post a link to in voice text chat text, an excellent place to ask questions if you have them.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And just double check, can everyone hear me okay? Or can you guys hear me okay?
You sound great. Yes.
Awesome. First I wanted to just remind everyone who's listening that if they have questions, they can certainly request to speak, and or just drop messages into voice chat text if you are not comfortable being recorded. Wanted to just a lot of these like Discord stages, we sort of forget how to interject, and that you can actually ask to speak. So I always like to remind people. HIP 58 is a proposal by the core devs to implement a what I like to call like a sanity check on proof of coverage. So when we launched proof of coverage v11, one of the things that was added or was sort of modified is the sort of continuous curve of acceptable RSI and SNR. And so like essentially this allowed, if you were clever enough or you wanted to try to game the system, it allowed you to submit really, really distant witness reports, either by capturing that witness data and modifying it and resubmitting it, or sort of doing something else, some kind of packet modification or message modification. And so really, what we want to do with this, and we actually thought about this when we wrote POC v11. And I think we did a poor job describing it when we were about to launch POC v11. We added this feature that essentially just capped the distance limit for sort of acceptable witnesses. And this already has existed on the network for a very long time on the sort of near end, right? You can only witness another hotspot if you're at least one a few hex or a few hex cells away. The sort of 300 meter a number is what a lot of people know about. So this sort of is the other side of it, right? This is sort of the maximum distance. And the way that we came to 100 kilometers specifically is we sort of thought about what are the current LoRaWAN use cases out there. Typically sensors don't have massive 12 dBi antennas as much as I forget who, I think it was Heafy or someone else in the channel that was sort of showing us his mapper that had an enormous antenna next to it. Most sensors don't have that. Most sensors have smaller antennas and operate at lower power, but they're still able to reach, because of how great LoRaWAN is, they're still able to reach, 25 kilometers away, sometimes more. They're sometimes 30 kilometers away. So we thought, let's assume that most sensors can reach 50 kilometers. Let's just double that to sort of incentivize new use cases and new sensors to come out that can support up to 100 kilometers, because they know that these hotspots will be able to, have verified coverage at that distance. And let's use 100 kilometers as our limit. So that's sort of the core of this HIP. There's some analysis that we put into it. Starwatcher and Evan from the DY has, all have sort of put some interesting analysis in there to sort of really understand like what impact this would have. And our expectation is that, for most legitimate deployments, for almost all legitimate deployments, this would have almost no impact. And even for some legitimate deployments that are maybe near water, where you might get lucky, you might bounce off a cloud, you might bounce off the water, and you might get lucky. That really is, and those are legitimate deployments, or those are important, but they are not reliable links. And so we really want to incentivize reliable links within the 100-kilometer range, and really because ultimately this is about sensors. So that's what this HIP is about. And we'd love for an open discussion in the HIP channel about it. But open to answer any questions now too.
Thank you, Hashcode, as always. I guess it's probably covered in the proposal, but for the group, are there any downsides from, or even sort of like an estimate of how many, to your point, sort of legitimate miracle signals might get excluded from this?
And we sort of see sort of less than 1% impact, and that's across the. There's I think the best graph. I'll actually just pull it directly from the HIP. There's a really good graph that Evan from the DY posted as an edit to the HIP that I really like, and I'll post it into the channel in a second.
That's great, yeah. And then even some folks are chiming in saying, Olaf here, I'm an off-grid 3,000 feet above everyone else, and I agree with a 100-kilometer limit too. So, yeah, and this scatter plot with the orange and blue circles really showing how the folks on the denial list are all way out of kilter, but legit hotspots. There you go. Yeah, killer chart. I've seen some great charts in my time, but that is a killer chart.
Yeah, I think who's the like the Edward Tufte? This is like Tufte would love this thing.
Yeah. That's great. Any questions from the audience related to HIP? I should check my numbers. HIP 58 POC distance limit. Paul M. When vote? Paul gets me.
I think the vote. I feel like 3 to 4 days of discussion is valid for any new HIP, right? I don't think we should rush to a vote ever, unless there's an emergency, right? I don't think we should rush to a vote. And so, I think I would be open to starting a vote sometime this weekend. I was also curious, maybe people can sort of mention in the community in the chat, should we have like a preliminary vote on Discord or go straight to a full, heliumvote.com thing? So I'm just curious what people think. I would love to just go straight to a vote.
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like the voting piece of our process is still a work in progress, but the straw polls barely hold water, so I'm perfectly happy to try the full bore version of it. Actually, another question for me, I don't think it was addressed in the HIP, is this simply like a chain variable that gets turned on, or is there actually code changes required as part of this?
So we actually already wrote the code. It's part of.
Amazing.
It's been on chain for since November. It's just a variable that needs to be activated. So
fantastic.
Within minutes of vote closing, we could potentially issue the bar.
Yeah, great. That's what we love to hear here on the hip calls is hip code. Real hips have code. Yes, Jeremy. That's great. Hashcode, thank you so much as always. It's a real pleasure. If nothing else to say, we have no other questions for you. Everybody is voting to just go straight to a legit vote, and the code's all ready to go. And if there, I agree with the sentiment of keeping some space before a vote, just to make sure there's no unanswered questions. But this seems very focused, and code is written, and great charts. Who can complain?
That's a good question here. One before I jump off, would a new vote be needed if the current proposed distance was not good enough? Like if you want to increase or decrease the distance? I think that's a great question. If there's a lore